You trust the olive oil on your bench because the label tells you to. Tonight, that trust is about to crack. Olive oil is one of the most popular pantry staples in Australia, and many of these brands have earned years, sometimes decades of consumer confidence. Today, we're exposing the brands betraying that trust. In the next 15 minutes, I'll reveal the products in this category that are damaging consumers through toxic ingredients, deceptive labels, and predatory marketing. By the end of this video, viewers will know exactly what to avoid and what they should actually use instead. I went through labels, pricing, country of origin statements, processing clues, and real-world cooking performance. What I found wasn't illegal, but it was deeply misleading. Olive oil is confusing by design. Terms like light, pure, and even extra virgin are used in ways that sound reassuring while hiding how the oil was actually made, how old it is, and how little olive character remains. Let's count down the worst offenders, from bad to outright unacceptable. Number 10. Woolworths Essentials Olive Oil. This is one of the most commonly purchased olive oils in Australia because it's cheap, widely available, and backed by a supermarket brand people already trust. It sits on the shelf as the default option for households that cook regularly and don't want to think too hard about oil. The label says olive oil, and for many consumers, that's enough. The problem starts with what that label doesn't say. This oil is heavily refined, meaning it's been processed at high heat and filtered to remove odors, flavors, and natural compounds that define real olive oil. What's left is a neutral fat with minimal antioxidants and almost no olive character. Consumers think they're buying something closer to extra virgin olive oil, but in reality they're getting a product that behaves more like a generic, refined cooking oil. In actual use, the shortcomings are obvious. When heated, it lacks the stability and depth you'd expect, offering no aroma and no flavor contribution to food. Drizzle it over vegetables or pasta, and it disappears entirely. Use it for sautéing, and it provides grease, not richness. Any health halo associated with olive oil simply doesn't apply here in any meaningful way. Then there's the value problem. While the price looks low compared to premium oils, it's high for what is essentially a refined fat with olive branding. At the same cost, consumers could buy better performing refined oils or spend slightly more for a genuine extra virgin olive oil that actually delivers flavor and freshness. This product exists to meet a price point, not a quality standard. It relies on consumer assumption rather than transparency. The result is an oil that technically meets labeling requirements, but fails to meet the expectations most people have when they reach for olive oil in the first place. Number 9. Coles Smart Buy Olive Oil. This is another supermarket staple that benefits from familiarity and convenience. Shoppers grab it because it's affordable, easy to find, and carries the implicit reassurance of a major retailer's name. For many households, it becomes a repeat purchase simply because it's always there and nothing about the label raises immediate red flags. The issue is that this oil is designed for shelf stability and margin control, not performance or freshness. The sourcing information is vague, the processing method is heavily refined, and there's no meaningful indication of harvest date or olive variety. That matters because olive oil is a perishable product. Without freshness, it loses both flavor and functional benefits, even if it remains legal to sell. In real-world cooking, the limitations show quickly. When heated, it produces a flat, slightly greasy result without the clean finish that fresher oils provide. There's no aroma when it hits the pan, and no structure to carry flavors from garlic, herbs, or vegetables. Used cold, it adds nothing at all. You could remove it from a dish and barely notice the difference, which says everything about its quality. There's also the matter of oxidation. Once opened, this oil degrades faster than expected, developing stale notes well before the bottle is finished. That points to oil that was already old or overly processed before it reached the shelf. Consumers end up wasting product or unknowingly cooking with degraded oil. Price is where the illusion really breaks. While marketed as a budget option, it's still priced higher than alternative refined oils that perform just as well or better. You're paying extra for the word olive, not for measurable quality. This is a product built around low expectations and passive buying habits. It doesn't actively harm, but it doesn't deliver either. For consumers who believe they're making a smart, healthy choice, the reality falls short in almost every practical way. Number 8. La Española olive oil. This brand trades heavily on Spanish heritage, traditional imagery, and a sense of European authenticity that resonates with Australian consumers. The bottle design and name suggest lineage, expertise, and time-tested quality. Many buyers assume they're stepping up from supermarket generics into something closer to what people actually use in Mediterranean kitchens. The reality is less impressive. Much of this oil is refined or blended to achieve a consistent, mild profile that appeals to the widest possible audience. That consistency comes at a cost. Refining strips out the volatile compounds that give olive oil its aroma, bitterness, and peppery finish. What remains is safe, shelf-stable, and predictable, but largely empty. In the kitchen, this shows immediately. Heat it in a pan, and there's no fragrance, no signal that you're working with fresh olives. Sautéed vegetables don't gain depth, and proteins don't develop the richness you'd expect from a quality olive oil. Used cold, the oil feels slick rather than vibrant, leaving a slightly waxy mouthfeel that sits on food instead of integrating with it. The brand's pricing adds to the problem. La Española often sits in the mid to upper range compared to supermarket oils, creating an expectation of better sourcing and fresher product. Instead, consumers are paying a premium for branding and imported status, not for measurable improvements in flavor or performance. There's no clear harvest date, no meaningful transparency about olive varieties, and no indication that freshness is a priority. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the brand doesn't need to mislead. Spanish olive oil, when fresh and properly handled, can be excellent. But this product is designed for scale, not excellence. It leans on reputation to justify compromises that most consumers would reject if they understood them. The end result is an oil that looks trustworthy, sounds authentic, and delivers very little. It's not terrible, but it's far from what the branding implies. And for the price, that gap matters. Number 7. Moro olive oil. This is a brand that positions itself as a quiet step up from basic supermarket options. It's often chosen by consumers who want something that feels more considered without venturing into specialty stores or spending significantly more. The packaging suggests simplicity and quality, and for many buyers, that visual cue is enough to assume they're making a smarter choice. The problem lies in how the oil is produced and managed before it ever reaches the shelf. Moro relies heavily on refined oil blended with smaller amounts of virgin oil to create a mild, inoffensive profile. That approach extends shelf life and reduces batch variability, but it also removes most of what makes olive oil valuable in the first place. Freshness becomes secondary to consistency, and flavor is treated as a risk rather than an asset. In practical cooking, the weaknesses are easy to spot. When heated, the oil lacks aroma and structure. Garlic and onions sautéed in it don't bloom the way they should, and the oil fails to carry flavors across a dish. There's no bitterness, no peppery finish, and no sense of vitality. It behaves like a neutral fat rather than an ingredient with its own role. Cold applications don't rescue it either. Drizzled over bread or vegetables, the oil feels thin and hollow. Instead of enhancing the food, it simply coats it. That's a clear sign of oil that's either overly processed, aged, or both. For consumers who expect olive oil to add character, this is a letdown. Another concern is oxidation. Once the bottle is opened, the oil degrades noticeably faster than higher quality alternatives. Within weeks, subtle stale notes emerge, and the oil loses whatever limited brightness it had. That suggests the oil was already close to the end of its optimal window when packaged, or that refining has left it more vulnerable to breakdown. Price compounds the issue. Moro is often priced above entry-level oils, which creates an expectation of improved quality and performance. In reality, the marginal increase in cost doesn't translate to a meaningful upgrade in the kitchen. Consumers are paying for perceived positioning rather than tangible benefits. What ultimately puts Moro on this list is the gap between promise and delivery. It doesn't make bold claims, but it quietly relies on consumers assuming it's better than it is. For everyday cooking, there are cheaper oils that perform just as well, and for slightly more money, there are genuine extra virgin options that actually justify the label. This oil exists in an uncomfortable middle ground, neither economical nor truly good, and that makes it easy to outgrow once you pay attention. Number 6. Red Island Olive Oil. This is a brand that benefits from familiarity and broad distribution rather than clear excellence. Many consumers recognize the name, have used it for years, and assume consistency equates to quality. It's often treated as a safe, middle-of-the-road choice, better than the cheapest options, but not positioned as premium. The main issue is inconsistency, and inconsistency in olive oil is a serious problem. Bottles can vary noticeably from one purchase to the next, which points to blended sourcing and a lack of tight quality control. There's little transparency around harvest dates or olive varieties, making it difficult for consumers to assess freshness. Without that information, buyers are relying entirely on brand trust rather than measurable indicators. In the kitchen, this inconsistency shows up fast. Some bottles perform reasonably well under moderate heat, while others burn earlier than expected or leave a faintly bitter aftertaste that doesn't align with fresh extra virgin olive oil. Aroma is unreliable. Sometimes there's a mild fruitiness. Other times the oil is nearly scentless. That unpredictability makes it hard to use confidently, especially for cooks who want repeatable results. Cold use exposes the weaknesses even more clearly. When drizzled over salads or bread, the oil often lacks clarity and vibrancy. Instead of lifting the dish, it sits on top, offering oiliness without definition. That's not what consumers expect when they see extra virgin on a label. Shelf life is another concern. Once opened, the oil can decline quickly, developing dull or slightly stale notes well before the bottle is finished. That suggests either older oil at bottling, less careful storage, or both. Given a price point, consumers reasonably expect better handling and fresher product. Speaking of price, Red Island typically sits in a range that implies reliability and competence. It's not cheap enough to excuse flaws, and not good enough to justify the cost. At the same price, there are smaller producers and more transparent brands offering clearer sourcing and more consistent performance. What keeps Red Island from ranking lower is that it's not aggressively misleading. It doesn't rely on flashy claims or exaggerated health messaging. But the absence of deception doesn't equal quality. For an oil that positions itself as a dependable everyday choice, the lack of consistency undermines its value. In the end, Red Island represents a common problem in mass-market olive oil comfortable complacency. It coasts on recognition while delivering a product that's uneven, underwhelming, and increasingly easy to replace once consumers learn what to look for. Number 5. So-called extra light olive oils sold under multiple major brands. These products are everywhere in Australian supermarkets and are often chosen by well-meaning consumers who believe lighter means healthier, cleaner, or better suited for cooking. The term sounds reassuring, especially to people trying to avoid strong flavors or manage calories. That assumption is exactly what these products rely on. Extra light does not describe quality, freshness, or nutritional superiority. It describes how much has been removed. These oils are heavily refined, processed at high temperatures to strip out color, aroma, and flavor. In the process, most of the naturally occurring antioxidants and beneficial compounds found in genuine extra virgin olive oil are destroyed. What remains is a neutral fat with olive oil branding. In practical use, this becomes obvious almost immediately. When heated, extra light olive oil behaves much like refined seed oil. It offers no aroma when it hits the pan and contributes nothing to the flavor of the food. Garlic doesn't bloom, herbs don't release their oils, and vegetables don't develop depth. Used cold, the oil is nearly invisible, providing slickness without character. If you removed it from a recipe, the end result would barely change. Health perceptions are another major issue. Many buyers believe extra light olive oil is lower in calories or fat. It isn't. Calorically, it's no different from any other olive oil. The difference is that it lacks the polyphenol and compounds that give real olive oil its health reputation. Consumers end up paying for a health halo that no longer applies. Price makes this even harder to justify. Extra light olive oils are often priced higher than refined canola or sunflower oil, despite offering no functional or nutritional advantage over those alternatives. At the same time, they're cheaper than quality extra virgin oils, creating a false middle ground that feels like a compromise but delivers no upside. What makes these products particularly frustrating is how deliberately the terminology is used. Extra light sounds like an upgrade when it's actually a downgrade. It shifts attention away from how the oil was processed and how old it might be, focusing instead on a vague promise of ease and neutrality. These oils aren't illegal and they're not immediately dangerous, but they are deeply misleading. They exist to capture consumers who want olive oil benefits without olive oil flavor, and in doing so, they deliver neither. Once you understand what extra light really means, it becomes clear that this is a category built on confusion rather than value. Number 4. Filippo Berrio Olive Oil. This is a brand with deep recognition and long-standing trust. Many consumers associate the name with tradition, Italian expertise, and reliable quality. It often feels like a safe purchase, especially for people who want something more reputable than generic supermarket oils without paying boutique prices. The core issue is scale. Filippo Berrio operates on an industrial level, sourcing olives from multiple countries and blending oils to achieve a consistent, mild flavor year after year. That consistency is marketed as reliability, but in olive oil, it usually signals compromise. Blending across regions and harvests makes it easier to mask age, uneven quality, and declining freshness. On the label, the oil often carries broad origin statements, rather than specific harvest details. There's no clear indication of when the olives were picked, how quickly they were processed, or how long the oil sat before bottling. That lack of transparency matters because olive oil degrades over time, even if it remains legal to sell as extra virgin. In real cooking, the limitations are clear. When heated, Filippo Berrio oil lacks aromatic lift. There's little fragrance, minimal bitterness, and almost no peppery finish. Food cooks evenly, but it doesn't improve. Sautéed vegetables remain flat, and proteins don't pick up any depth from the oil. Used cold, the oil feels smooth but hollow, coating food rather than enhancing it. Another issue is performance under heat. Despite being marketed as versatile, the oil can burn or smoke earlier than expected, especially when used for higher heat cooking. That inconsistency suggests oil that's either older or less stable than fresher alternatives. Price plays a significant role in why this brand appears on this list. Filippo Berrio is not cheap. It's priced as a quality option, which creates expectations it doesn't consistently meet. For the same cost, consumers can find smaller producers with clearer sourcing, fresher oil, and noticeably better flavor. Alternatively, cheaper refined oils can match its neutral performance without pretending to be something more. What makes Filippo Berrio particularly disappointing is how much it relies on reputation. The brand's history and imagery do the heavy lifting, while the product itself has been optimized for shelf life and mass appeal rather than excellence. This oil isn't a disaster, but it's a missed opportunity. It represents how a respected name can slowly drift away from what made it meaningful in the first place. For consumers who value transparency, freshness, and real performance, Filippo Berrio no longer earns the trust its branding assumes. Number 3. Imported olive oils labeled as product of multiple countries and sold at premium prices. These bottles are designed to look serious and authoritative. Dark glass, European typography, gold accents, and shelf placement that implies quality. Consumers see the price and assume they're paying for better olives, better handling, and better results. In reality, they're often paying to have problems hidden more effectively. The phrase product of multiple countries is not a mark of craftsmanship. It's a warning sign. It means olives or oils from different regions, climates, and harvest seasons have been blended together. This is done to hit a consistent flavor profile and color, not to maximize freshness or quality. Blending at this scale allows producers to dilute older or weaker oils with fresher ones, extending shelf life while masking decline. Freshness is the first casualty. Olive oil is at its best within a relatively short window after harvest. When oils from multiple countries are combined, that window becomes impossible to trace. A bottle might contain oil from last season mixed with oil from even earlier harvests, all legally sold as extra virgin. By the time it reaches an Australian shelf, the oil may already be well past its peak. In cooking, these oils reveal their weaknesses quickly. When heated, they often smoke inconsistently, a sign of reduced stability. There's little aroma when the oil hits the pan, and the flavor contribution is minimal. Food cooks, but it doesn't improve. For an oil positioned as premium, that's a fundamental failure. Cold use exposes the blending even more. Drizzled over salads or bread, the oil lacks definition. Instead of fruitiness, bitterness, or peppery bite, you get a generic oiliness that feels manufactured rather than alive. This is the result of averaging everything out until nothing stands out. Price is where this category becomes especially problematic. These oils are often priced close to genuinely high-quality extra virgin olive oils from single estates or clearly defined regions. Consumers believe they're upgrading, when in fact they're buying an industrial blend with a better costume. The cost reflects marketing, logistics, and import branding, not superior olives or care. Labeling practices compound the confusion. While technically compliant, the lack of harvest dates, specific regions, or olive varieties leaves consumers guessing. The information that actually matters is replaced with vague assurances and romantic language. Legality becomes a shield against scrutiny. What makes these oils particularly frustrating is that they actively exploit consumer trust. They look like the answer for people who want quality but don't have time to research. Instead, they reward opacity and scale over transparency and freshness. These products aren't chosen because they perform better. They're chosen because they sound better. Once you strip away the packaging and test them in real kitchens, they fail to justify their price or their positioning. For consumers paying premium money, ambiguity should never be the main ingredient. Number 2, private label olive oils sold as extra virgin. These are typically supermarket or distributor branded products that look clean, simple, and reassuring. The words extra virgin are printed clearly on the front, often in large type, because producers know that phrase still carries weight. For many consumers, it signals quality, health, and authenticity, and that assumption drives the purchase. The problem is that extra virgin is a legal standard, not a guarantee of excellence. These private label oils are formulated to meet the minimum requirements of that standard at the lowest possible cost. That usually means large-scale sourcing, extensive blending, and minimal emphasis on freshness. As long as the oil passes chemical and sensory tests at the time of certification, it can carry the label, even if it's already on the downward slope by the time it reaches the shelf. One of the biggest red flags is the absence of harvest dates. Instead, consumers are given a best before date that can extend years into the future. That date says nothing about when the olives were picked or how long the oil sat in storage. Olive oil doesn't improve with age. And without harvest information, buyers have no way to judge how close the oil is to its peak or how far past it may already be. In actual use, these oils often disappoint. When heated, they can smoke earlier than expected, indicating lower stability. Aromatics are muted or inconsistent, and the oil fails to carry flavors through a dish. Used cold, the oil may feel smooth but lacks the bitterness and peppery finish that signal freshness. It's technically olive oil, but it behaves like a diluted version of what consumers think they're buying. Shelf life after opening is another issue. Many private label extra virgin oils degrade quickly once exposed to air and light, developing stale or flat notes within weeks. That suggests the oil was already marginal before bottling or that it was handled with storage efficiency, not quality, as the priority. Pricing makes this especially misleading. These oils are often positioned as affordable quality, sitting between cheap refined oils and premium extra virgin options. Consumers believe they're making a smart compromise. In reality, they're paying more than they should for oil that barely clears the extra virgin threshold. What elevates this from disappointment to concern is how quietly it happens. There's no dramatic failure, no obvious defect. The oil simply underperforms, and consumers blame their cooking rather than the product. Private label extra virgin olive oils exist in a gray zone where legality replaces transparency. They rely on the strength of a term most shoppers don't have the time or knowledge to question. For anyone who actually wants the benefits and performance associated with extra virgin olive oil, this category demands far more scrutiny than it currently receives. Number 1. Bertolli olive oil. This is arguably the most trusted and recognizable olive oil brand in Australia. Many households have used it for decades, and its name carries the weight of heritage, Italian identity, and quality. For a consumer, the packaging suggests tradition, expertise, and reliability, values that inspire confidence at the point of purchase. That trust is exactly why this brand is the worst offender. The gap between image and reality is significant. The core issue with Bertolli is industrial-scale blending. The oil is sourced from multiple countries, often including regions far removed from Italy, and then blended to achieve a consistent flavor profile that will look familiar to consumers year after year. This process sacrifices freshness, aroma, and nutritional quality. The product may meet the legal definition of extra virgin, but that standard allows oils to be old, refined, or blended without meaningful flavor. Harvest information is generally absent. Bottles may include a best before date, but there is no clear indication of when the olives were pressed or how long the oil has been in storage. Olive oil is perishable, and even a few months can make a measurable difference in flavor and performance. By the time Bertolli reaches an Australian shelf, it is often past its prime. In the kitchen, the shortcomings are obvious. When heated, Bertolli oil lacks aroma, bitterness, and peppery finish. It doesn't carry flavors from herbs or vegetables and provides only neutral fat for cooking. Cold applications reveal the same deficiency. Drizzled over salads or bread, it feels smooth but hollow, lacking the complexity or vibrancy of fresh extra virgin olive oil. The oil doesn't enhance food, it merely coats it. Oxidation is another concern. Once opened, the oil deteriorates quickly, developing flat or stale notes. This points to oil that was already old when bottled or that lacks resilience due to heavy processing. Consumers paying premium prices are left with a product that underperforms both in flavor and stability. Pricing amplifies the problem. Bertolli is sold as a mid to high range option, creating expectations of superior sourcing, freshness, and performance. Yet, the product delivers none of those consistently. The brand relies heavily on consumer trust, reputation, and packaging cues rather than transparency or quality. What makes Bertolli particularly egregious is the subtlety of its deception. There is no overt false advertising. The oil technically meets labeling requirements, but the presentation implies an authenticity and vibrancy that the product cannot deliver. Consumers are misled by heritage branding, premium positioning, and consistent shelf appeal. Bertolli olive oil exemplifies how a trusted name can exploit consumer assumptions. It's legal, widely available, and familiar, but for anyone seeking real extra virgin olive oil, fresh, flavorful, and high-performing, this brand consistently fails to deliver. The reliance on trust over transparency makes it the worst offender in the Australian market. Here's the simple rule to follow. Ignore romantic language. Look for a clear harvest date, a single country origin, and avoid words like light or pure. If it doesn't tell you when and where it was made, put it back. Reading a label for 10 seconds will save you money, improve your cooking, and stop you from rewarding brands that rely on confusion instead of quality.